When someone says Mirror's Edge, what is it that comes to your mind? Is it the edge of a mirror? A free-running sandbox? A subpar beat-em-up perhaps? Or maybe a world where every device can be interfaced with by pressing your palm against a screen? Mirror's Edge Catalyst is all of those things, and then some. A game that just grazes the edge of greatness before plummeting 100 meters onto the ground below. For every single thing it gets right, it manages to screw something else up. While being a successor to 2008's Mirror's Edge, it plays it uncomfortably safe, trying to both explore new avenues while still staying some of its roots in familiar grounds. The original was a unique title. It felt more like an experimental tech demo that took a direction so outlandish, there isn't a game that truly tried to replicate it since, and in its own way, it succeeded in what it tried to do. Catalyst intends to expand on this proof of concept by fleshing it out via an open world, packed but not chock full of activities. Movement is slick and refined, lending to a sense of tangible weight behind your every action. It's also open to simple tricks that make gameplay a lot more amusing. For instance, you can wall climb, quick turn, reorient yourself and perform another wall climb on an adjacent wall, allowing convenient access to areas that usually require more effort to get to. Or how dashing backwards is the fastest instant velocity you can get. So instead of descending down this building like a sane person, you can reverse dash off onto a top below, because video games. The open world is no doubt in service to its core gameplay, and is one of the more impressive game worlds I've had the pleasure to explore. Going point to point has multiple routes available to you, allowing for several sub-routes in any given run. This is best illustrated by the dash challenges. The design is awe-inspiring, incorporating subtle traversal hints into the environment via color and lighting, while also containing puzzle platforming elements. The grid nodes encompass the ladder, and involve finding a route to your goal near the top of the node. It gives off a Portal vibe, both via its minimalist color palette and design, as well as its essence. The player has a set of mechanics at their disposal and the freedom to use them however they please, and you're expected to reach the goal by chaining a set of actions with the appropriate environmental cue. However, those flashing moments of brilliance are just that. Flashes. One of my biggest nitpicks with the game is the automatic slowdown that kicks in when you're at certain edges. Making this jump was damn near impossible and nothing short of an exercise in frustration, purely because the developers thought the player was too mentally handicapped to make the decision for themselves. One could argue that this was done for player safety, but if that were the case, the rules should be consistent. There's nothing more aggravating than a mechanic that breaks its own rules. By doing this, it's actively antagonizing the player. Another confusing design decision makes itself apparent in the collectibles. The majority of them require you to stop dead in your tracks, losing all your momentum just to pick up a chip. And when the city is dotted with such collectibles numbering in the hundreds, it makes you think, what absolute genius conceived the notion that in a game that primarily focuses on free running and speed, it'd be a masterstroke of brilliance to stop and increment a number on a menu every so often. It's ridiculous, and it stands in stark contrast to the game's other main collectible, Grid Leaks, which just require you to be a foot away from them to pick them up. This allows you to pick them up while free running, making collecting them a far more satisfying experience, even if it's equally meaningless. Just as confusing as the stop and pop collectibles is the combat system. Gone is the clunky gunplay from the original, now replaced with a half fleshed out melee system in a game that doesn't really need it. The main problem here, aside from the tripe AI, is the way the game treats the combat. Sure, ziplining into a dropkick is satisfying, but at times the game is content to just lock you in a room with grunts, so all the combat motion capture won't go unappreciated. All this while it simultaneously tells you that it's better to run and sometimes expects you to. While I may call it unnecessary, I could also use the word missed opportunity to describe the combat. And it isn't the only one it misses. The game introduces a mag rope that functions like a mechanical grappling hook, which attaches to specific anchor points around the wall. One of its most important features is the fact that it preserves momentum while swinging. But it allows for little control over any parameters apart from your getting off point. And it's used so scarcely that its presence and implementation feel more like a glorified QTE than anything else. It's as though the developers had a fixed amount of grapple points to work with and decided to throw 80% of them in a place only accessible in the final story mission. What? It never feels like the game truly goes all out with this premise, like the developers were somewhat concerned that some contemporary similarity should have been part of the game so that it appealed to a larger crowd, or maybe they wanted to adhere to the standard of copy-paste open world games we have. That's the immediate impression I got when I looked at the upgrade screen. In the context of the narrative, if your character, Faith, has been a runner for several years, why is she then unable to perform a role to break her fall without completing so-and-so story mission? There's zero cohesion between these token mechanics and the story being told. I think Racepick put it best. Catalyst merely scores the same grade on a harder test. Sure, it's a measurably better game than its predecessor, but in expanding its scope, it's failed to maintain its unity as an experience. What it's trying to deliver gets diluted with silly choices in design, and this only grows more apparent and infuriating the more time you spend with them. Does all this mean you shouldn't even bother with the game? Absolutely not. Or at least not at full price. For the simple fact that despite its flaws in other departments, the core of Catalyst, the free-running, manages to shine in spite of it. It's ridiculously polished and makes the most impressive use of the first-person perspective as a non-shooter that I've seen till date. There are some suggestions I'd like to add that'll make your experience much more enjoyable if you so choose to heed them. First up, ignore the story. It's largely mundane and told via awkward dialogue and inconsistent character writing. At best, it contains unique archetypes such as Papa Bear, Shadow the Hedgehog, always on her period, reduce, reuse, recycled character traits, the obvious plot twist, and the villain who hasn't been fleshed out in the slightest. No, I am not going to read up on it on the wiki if I have no interest in the first place. Fuck off! Secondly, turn off Rhonda's vision. It's for your own good. I mean, what merit is there to having an open world when you keep being told where to go? As I mentioned previously, the developers have already gone through the effort of making available routes visible via color and lighting. There's a clear difference between those you can and can't get through. Interactive elements have themed hues and new areas are hinted at via light placement and shadow casting. A clear example of this in another fantastic game is Uncharted 3's rooftop segment, near the very beginning. Remember, you do not need a GPS to climb the stairs. Stop. Third, disable most of the assisting HUD elements. Trust me, you don't need a massive fucking reticle to know there's a guy to your right and two in front of you. You have eyes, for crying out loud. The less clutter on your screen, the better. And last but not least, have fun with it. With most of the HUD aids turned off, it all comes down to your creativity and observation to get through the game, and it certainly makes the effort the developers put in significantly more appreciable. Oh, and if you can play it on a PC, just go for it. There are a couple of neat mods that can help you in your experience, like a minimalist HUD and adjusting the color grading. And being a first-person game, it naturally plays better on a keyboard and mouse than a controller, so there. Mirror's Edge Catalyst is a refreshing game that came out of the doldrums of 2016. Its core stays true to the original, while its other aspects deviate in more unnecessary directions. If DICE wants to iterate on this formula with the sequel, they need to understand what really makes the game tick and trim away the fat before progressing. At this stage, I have my doubts about this happening, given publisher interference is a thing, and EA is one of the bigger shit stains on the window of gaming. But hey, pessimistic optimism is the way to go with expectations.